Laws of exception. The open boycott ended on April 1st, although the National Socialist press, the official leaders of the party, as well as their spokesman, had assured the whole organization that this historic Saturday must be regarded as merely a test preparatory to a whole series of other measures, which would be carried out unless the opinion of the world, which at the moment was hostile, underwent a complete change. Opinion in other countries certainly changed radically, but in a direction unfavorable to the Third Empire. The government in Germany was quick to notice this. In fact, they noted it even before the boycott, and they realized that this open demonstration against the Jews was bad business. The National Socialists have principles, but they've always been prepared to sell them. The retreat. In the course of the week before the boycott, even Herr Streicher, evidently under instructions from the government, stated that it would not be necessary to resume the boycott, and the Minister for Propaganda and National Enlightenment told the representatives of the foreign press on March 31st, quote, that the government had decided provisionally to restrict the boycott against the Jews to Saturday, April 1st, when it would operate from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8 in the evening. After that, no further action would be taken until Wednesday. If the international press had by then stopped its agitation against Germany, no further action would be taken. But if this were not the case, a boycott would be started at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and this boycott would drive the Jews of Germany into absolute ruin. The instructions that 2 months' wages and salaries of employees of Jewish firms must be paid in advance from April 1st is cancelled. End of quote. The last sentence of this announcement shows that under the pressure of events, the National Socialists had been forced to repeal their own decrees. It had originally been decided that all owners of Jewish shops must pay all their Christian employees 2 months' salary in advance. The consequence of this was a run on the banks which might have led to a catastrophe if this decree had not been withdrawn at the earliest possible moment. The silent boycott. The public boycott was a demonstration, and as a demonstration it failed and was not resumed. On the other hand, the silent boycott was continued, a boycott which cost nothing and hit not so much the rich and powerful Jewish firms as the tens of thousands of Jewish employees, doctors, lawyers, teachers, officials, university professors, etc. Hundreds of thousands of Jews have been deprived of their living, but this has given hundreds of thousands of places for Nazi hangers-on. Jewish lawyers not allowed to practice. In Berlin, at first, out of 1,200 Jewish lawyers, only 35 were permitted to practice, and the number allowed to continue their practice in Cologne was only 4. All Jewish judges have been given leave of absence. The commissioner of the Prussian Ministry of Justice issued the following instructions on March 31st. Quote, the irritation of the people at the presumptuous attitude of Jewish lawyers and doctors has reached such a height that it is necessary to take into account the possibility that the people may take the law into their own hands, especially during the period of the defense campaign of the German people against the Jewish atrocity propaganda. This would endanger the authority of the administration of justice. I therefore request you to suggest to all Jewish judges now in office that they should at once apply for leave of absence, and this should immediately be granted to them. Please arrange with the Lawyers Association or other local organizations of the legal profession that from 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the number of Jewish lawyers permitted to practice is fixed in a proportion which is the same as that of the Jewish population to the rest of the population. It is unnecessary to point out that Jewish lawyers should not be employed as junior counsel, nor should they be allowed to take doc briefs or be appointed receivers in bankruptcy or trustees. All engagements of Jewish lawyers in connection with official cases must immediately be withdrawn. The executives of associations of lawyers must be induced to resign. If the provincial and local leaders of the National Socialists express the desire to supervise the maintenance of security and order within the court building by sending armed pickets to these places, their wishes should be complied with. End of quote. Similar instructions were issued against Jewish doctors. In the first place, they were excluded from health insurance practice, which, of course, covered the great majority of all cases. The teachers and lecturers in Prussian educational institutions were required by the Minister of Culture, Rust, to fill out a questionnaire as to their racial origin. The civil service. As for government officials, the following decree was published in the beginning of April. Quote, anyone of non-Aryan descent, particularly if their parents or grandparents were Jewish, is to be regarded as non-Aryan. One parent or one grandparent who is non-Aryan is sufficient. This is particularly to be assumed when one parent or grandparent has been a member of the Jewish religious community. Furthermore, every official who has joined the service since August 1, 1914, must prove that he is of Aryan descent, or that he fought at the front, or that his son or father fell in the World War. Birth certificates and marriage certificates of parents, in addition to military papers, must be sent in. If the Aryan descent of an official is doubtful, a decision must be made by the Office of Experts for Racial Investigation attached to the Ministry of the Interior. In deciding whether the provisions of Section 4, Paragraph 1 apply, the whole political activity of the official concerned, particularly since November 9, 1918, must be taken into account. Every official is under an obligation to inform his superior authorities to what political party he has hitherto belonged and what his political activities have been. The Reichsbanner, the Republican Richterbund, and the League for the Rights of Man are to be considered political parties within the meaning of this paragraph. This decree finally and definitely puts an end to the scandal of the November system, which aims at the destruction of the honest professional government servant by the introduction of party officials and office seekers. The consequences of this criminal policy have been the innumerable scandals of corruption, in which the people concerned were always representatives of the parties which, in November 1918, by treason and cowardice had put themselves at the head of a clean and untarnished state. It is well known, and does not require to be proved here in detail, that the most prominent supporters of the November Republic had been involved in the worst of these affairs. That period is now gone forever, and the new Germany will once more be administered by really efficient officials, as the world knows it was before the war. End of quote. The special importance of this decree is that subsequently almost all categories of university-trained people, doctors, lawyers, teachers in high schools, etc., and also bank officials and commercial employees were put through a sieve in accordance with the principles laid down in this decree. The attack on Jewish doctors. The following manifesto was published in the Medical Journal of Greater Berlin, dated May 20, 1933. The writer, a certain Dr. Rupin, is not just a nobody. He is commissioner of the Provincial Medical Association of the provinces of Brandenburg and Grenzmark. The article is headed, Away with Jewish Doctors. The text is as follows, quote, the complete removal of Jews from all academic professions is necessary. Members of the free academic professions, particularly doctors, come into personal contact with very wide circles of the population, and occupy a position of confidence in relation to their patients, which gives them influence over the outlook of the people with whom they are in contact. The provincial executive of the Doctors of Brandenburg therefore considers it unthinkable that in our national state a Jew should have the possibility of spreading the poison of Jewish thought in this way. Undoubtedly, the earlier ideal conception of professional duty has given way in wide circles of the profession to the Jewish commercial outlook, and this is due to the overloading of the profession with Jews. This commercial attitude must be driven out of the medical profession, and we must make its reintroduction impossible. Insofar as corruption has penetrated the profession, it must be rooted out by the most decisive measures. We, German doctors, therefore demand the exclusion of all Jews from the possibility of giving medical treatment to our German people, because the Jew is the incarnation of lies and deceit. Furthermore, we demand legislation to punish with imprisonment and immediate removal from the profession the offenses and crimes which are associated with the positions of confidence filled by the profession. We doctors ask all national professional organizations in Germany to support our demand. End of quote. By way of supplement to the above, we give the following decree of Commissioner Dr. Wagner, who is in control of the German medical associations. Quote, in pursuance of the boycott against the Jews, the Berlin Health Department, by agreement with the mayor, instructed its sections not to meet any claims from its members where Jewish doctors have been called in to treat cases on or after April 1st. Where a Jewish doctor had previously been called in, it is suggested that members should consider whether to continue to make use of him. The Health Insurance Institute hopes that a sense of national duty will prevent the members from making use of Jewish chemists, dispensaries, opticians, or dentists. End of quote. Dismissal of Jewish teachers. We can give only a few examples of the many similar instructions which have been issued in connection with the various professions. The future position of Jewish teachers in Germany is indicated by a letter issued by one of the most prominent of the Nazi leaders, Dr. Loppelmann, a member of the Prussian Diet. Quote, "We call your attention to the fact that it is intolerable that Jewish teachers should still fill posts in Prussian educational institutions, while German soldiers who fought at the front have to wander around as unpaid auxiliary teachers in their own fatherland. Furthermore, we consider it an impossible situation that any regard should be paid to the exaggerated claims of male and female Jewish scholars. On behalf of the National Socialist Parliamentary Fraction in Prussia, we expect you to take the following measures. 1. All Jewish teachers, that is, teachers of Jewish descent, must immediately be dismissed or sent on leave from all Prussian educational institutions. 2. In the case of male and female scholars who are Jews, the proportionate clause must be applied so that the percentage of pupils of Jewish origin in any institution must correspond with the proportion of Jews to the whole German population. That is to say, only 1% of the students at any institution may be Jews or of Jewish descent." End of quote. In accordance with this circular, almost all Jewish teachers employed in the public educational system were immediately granted leave. An instruction issued by the chief official of Brandenburg and Berlin extended these measures also to Jewish private teachers. A cabinet meeting on April 25th passed an act, quote, "against the excessive number of students of foreign race in German schools and universities." End of quote. The same principles were applied to the staffs of universities. In an earlier chapter, some of the best-known Jewish lecturers who have been dismissed are mentioned. Removal of Jewish editors and journalists. The Neue Freie Presse of April 13, 1933 reports, quote, "In the extraordinary general meeting of the members of the Berlin District Organization of the National Union of the German Press, it was unanimously decided to nominate Dr. Dietrich at the General Delegate Meeting for the presidency of the Union. After the general meeting of the Berlin organization, the new committee met and adopted unanimously a motion that in future no Jewish or Marxist editors were to be admitted to membership. A further motion for the General Delegate Meeting was also adopted unanimously, demanding that Jewish and Marxist editors not be permitted to enter or belong to the National Union of the German Press." End of quote. Almost all Jewish editors of German papers have been dismissed, and contributions from independent journalists of Jewish faith or Jewish origin are not accepted. It must be noted that in this connection even Jewish newspaper proprietors have achieved inglorious distinction. For example, Gutermann, the Jewish proprietor of the Neue Badische Landeszeitung in Mannheim, dismissed all his Jewish editorial staff and employees as early as March 1st. Debarred from lists of assessors and juries. The silent boycott of the Jews continues in every sphere. They are being banished from all public life. The Neue Freie Presse of April 12th reports the exclusion of Jews from the lists of assessors, jurymen, and arbitrators. Quote, "The government has decided to shorten the current period of office of all assessors and jurymen to June 30th, at which date the period of office of commercial arbitrators will also be brought to a close. The new lists of assessors and jurymen will be differently constituted in the future. As in present circumstances, the municipal authorities will naturally send people of a different outlook to participate in the electoral colleges. There will no longer be any communist assessors and jurymen. The number of Social Democrats nominated will be considerably smaller than hitherto, and it is probable that no Jews will be elected. The appointment of the new commercial arbitrators will also be on the same lines. The decree just issued provides that until new elections of assessors and jurymen are held, judges need not adhere to the existing rules for bringing in lay assistants, For example, they may pass over certain names on the lists. End of quote. Jews as outcasts in sport. Even in sport, every Jew is an outcast. Although even in America colored boxers are allowed to take part in championship fights, German boxers of Jewish faith or origin are no longer allowed to appear in the boxing ring in Germany. The holder of the middleweight championship in Germany, Eric Seelig, was prevented from defending his title in Germany. He was, however, able to show his form in France. Daniel Pren, who is far and away the best tennis player in Germany, can no longer be selected to represent Germany in international matches. We await with interest the steps which are to be taken against Helena Meyer, the champion woman fencer. Although probably no one looks more pure-blooded and Nordic than she does, she is the daughter of a Jewish doctor in Offenbach. We quote the following as a good example of many similar announcements. It was printed in the Neue Freie Presse of April 28, 1933. Quote, "The German Swimming Association issues the following statement. The German Swimming Association has adopted the Aryan Clause, in what form the membership of Jews in all sports associations, and therefore in the Swimming Association, will be regulated, and whether the Aryan Clause will be incorporated in the statutes of the association will be determined in accordance with instructions issued by the government. Meanwhile, I order that Jews shall be removed from all leading positions in the association and put into the background, and they must not appear as representatives in displays or take part in sports meetings." George Hacks. The German Swimming Association is at present affiliated to the International Swimming Association, and the Aryan Clause conflicts with the statutes of the latter body, which prescribe equality of rights for everyone. The president of the International Swimming Association is, however, Binner, who was removed from the executive of the German Association because of his international outlook. Pending the final decision of the Government Commissioner of Sport, the regulations relating to official posts will be applied to Jewish members of the DSB Union. This means that only those Jews, by race, not religion, who enjoy protection under the civil service law will be allowed to take part in sports meetings. End of quote. Malicious rumors. But when business questions come in this connection also loyalty to principle takes second place. The government-controlled 12 Uhr Mittagsblatt of April 19, 1933, under the heading Malicious Rumors, gives an assurance that the race question will not be raised at the 11th Olympiad, which is to take place in Berlin in 1936. Quote, "The foreign boycott propaganda against Germany has even penetrated sport. Many foreign papers have repeatedly stated during the last few weeks that efforts are being made, especially in the United States, to transfer to another country the Olympic Games which have been arranged for Berlin in 1936, on the alleged grounds that measures will be taken in Germany to prevent Jewish sportsmen from taking part in international competitions." In reply to an official inquiry, Avery Brundage, chairman of the American Olympic Committee, stated that the International Olympic Committee had the right to select where the Olympiad would be held. The committee, which is to meet in Vienna in June, would undoubtedly consider the question. His personal opinion was that the Olympic Games should not be held in a country where the fundamental Olympic principle of the equality of all races was being violated. In connection with the premature declaration made by this leading American sportsman, it must be stated that no measures have been or will be taken in Germany which make participation in international sporting events dependent on the question of race. The world can be confident that every individual who is sent to Berlin to represent his country in the Olympic Games will be received and treated as a guest, irrespective of his race or nationality. End of quote. Passports. Special regulations are also in force for Jewish holders of passports. The Breslau chief of police has issued instructions, quote, "The German citizens of Jewish faith, or formerly of Jewish faith, who are in possession of passports must present these in person at the police headquarters of the area in which they live, not later than April 3, 1933. The passports will be returned after they have been altered so as to make them valid only for internal traveling in Germany." End of quote. Special hours for the baths. There is hardly any possible regulation calculated to bring Jewish citizens into disrepute of which some person in authority or some administrative body has not thought. The town of Speyer in the Palatinate will live in the history of these times for its unique inventive powers. It has the glory of being the first German municipal authority to issue a regulation, quote, that in the interests of public order, Jews may only use the municipal baths at certain hours of the day, end of quote. Other German municipal authorities were quick to follow this example. The Frankfurter Zeitung of May 24, 1933 reports, quote, at the Tübingen council meeting on May 15th, it was moved by a National Socialist that Jews and persons of foreign race be excluded from the use of the free municipal baths. The motion was adopted with only 3 voting against it, end of quote. Shortly afterwards, the Upper Silesian newspapers published similar regulations. Dismissal of Jewish employees. It would be a mistake to think that German Jews were only thrown out of the professions. A good deal is said, and rightly so, about the outlawry of Jewish professors, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and artists, but unfortunately not so much attention is paid to the treatment of Jewish employees, small traders, and workers. But the main part of the Jewish population is covered by these categories, and the economic position of these Jews is just as difficult as that of the non-Jewish lower middle class and working class. The Nazi factory cell organizations have been most assiduous in depriving the Jewish clerks, small traders, and workers of their livelihood. A Berlin message of March 31st runs, quote, on the instructions of the National Socialist Party executive, the factory cell organization instructs National Socialist factory cell committees, together with the workers' organizations, to visit the Jewish shops and demand 2 months' payment in advance for Christian workers and employees. The demand should also be made that all Jewish employees be dismissed. Anyone refusing to comply with these demands must be immediately reported to the party leadership, which will take the necessary steps. Punctually at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, all employees and workers in Jewish shops must leave work and take part in warning off customers. Newspapers and vital industries are excepted, but in any case all Jewish employees must be dismissed. In the Ulstein Publishing House, the whole of the responsible editorial staff of Jewish race has been granted leave of absence. End of quote. The Frankfurter Zeitung of May 28, 1933 states, quote, it is reported in the Possnecker Handlerblatt, the official journal of the Association of German Merchants, Showmen, and Commercial Travelers, whose headquarters are at Dresden, that at a provincial conference of the Union of Traders, the question was raised whether Jewish merchants and traders would be allowed access to the markets in future. The president of the provincial organization put forth the view that the Jews must be completely rooted out. End of quote. Business is business, even for anti-Semites. The Völkischer Beobachter of April 2nd proclaims the spontaneous rise of prices on the stock exchange, now rid of Jews, as the most obvious result of the boycott movement. We know why such a point is made of this. It is to show that the fight is not against the existing system, not against capitalism, and not even against the excesses of capitalism, but that it is a competitive fight of the national profiteers against the Jewish profiteers. The members of the stock exchange can do business even on a stock exchange now rid of Jews. The fight is not against capitalism, not against private property, but against the small man, against the Aryan workers and middle class who are being hoaxed, against the Jewish employees and small traders who are being ruined, to the delight of the capitalists of Aryan and Jewish blood. The Aryan principles are regulated everywhere by the size of a man's purse. In a statement printed in the Berliner Tageblatt of March 31, 1933, Herr Oskar Wassermann, a director of the Deutsche Bank und Diskonto-Gesellschaft, correctly stated that he had not suffered the least inconvenience, and that the change of things had not made any noticeable difference so far as he was concerned, even from a social standpoint. The other Jewish capitalists may equally congratulate themselves. The National Socialist government is doing its utmost for their material well-being. It has issued reproofs to those in its lower organizations who thought that the basis of anti-Semitism was the National Socialist hostility to capitalism. It protects, if not the Jews, at least Jewish capital, business first. Capitalism, whether Aryan or represented by Jews, is not to fall a victim to the spiritual revival which the national revolution has brought to boiling point. The Frankfurter Zeitung and the Völkischer Beobachter of March 27th published the following letter addressed by the Commissioner for Trade, Dr. Wagner, to the President of the National Socialist Party Office for Municipal Politics, Mayor Fiehler of Munich. Quote, I have recently received from a number of business firms copies of circulars issued by various local authorities to a large number of manufacturers and other business concerns, with a view to ascertaining whether the concerns can be regarded as German undertakings. The questions put in the circulars are intended to discover to what extent the capital of the firm concerned is German, to what extent non-Aryan and non-German principles are connected with it, and so forth. While I am of course completely in agreement with the view that the municipalities particularly should only obtain their requirements from German firms, I nevertheless consider it necessary that a stop should be put to the measures which have been taken. The whole complex of questions raised in these circulars is not so simple that decisions can be made by a mere yes or no or on the basis of figures. It is rather the government's task to see that every undertaking in Germany, no matter where its capital comes from or who controls it, finds its place in the German economic system, and that the management of each undertaking is in future conducted exclusively from a German economic standpoint. In carrying through this necessary task, the government can, however, only be hindered if, through the action of certain authorities, a situation is created which reacts unfavorably on economic life. Our aim cannot be to ruin existing economic undertakings in Germany, even if they are worked with foreign capital and have hitherto been directed to some extent by foreign individuals, but rather to compel them to act in a German way and in conformity with the great principle laid down by our leader, the common good before private interests. I must therefore request you to use your influence as the leader of the Department of Municipal Politics to prevent further circulars of this type being issued in future, and to explain that such measures will cause a dislocation in the whole of the country's economic life, which, with the best will in the world, we do not want at the present time. End of quote. With the best will in the world. They do not want any capitalist to suffer loss in this national revolution. We knew this long ago. The people who still swear by the socialist Adolf Hitler and expect him to perform the miracle of securing for the peasants higher prices and at the same time lower prices for the consumer, higher wages for the workers, and at the same time greater profits for the employers, higher salaries for civil servants together with economies to the state. These misled and incited miracle believers will before long be roused from their hypnotized state by the undeniable and inexorable fact that in the Third Empire no one gains anything but the capitalists, whether they are of Jewish or non-Jewish faith. They will learn, from what they still have to experience in the Third Empire, that the whole campaign against the Jews has only served to distract them from the struggle against the people who are really responsible for their conditions. The Aryan clause and race officials. We have seen that the anti-Semitism of the New Germany has a biological basis, that it is racial anti-Semitism. This biological anti-Semitism dates back to the anti-Semitic campaign led by the court chaplain Stocker, which derived its ideology, that is, its pseudo-scientific justification, from Eugen Dühring's The Jewish Question as a Question of Racial Character. Race science, which used to be a hobby horse of freak writers and was never taken seriously, has now in the New Germany been declared as an official science, which means that it is now a lucrative profession. The Jews as a race. It is true that in spite of all its efforts, this science has not yet succeeded in proving that the Germans are a race. On the contrary, it is evident that the Germans are a mixed people and are very far from having any right to call themselves Nordic. But these curious research workers have not yet even succeeded in proving that the Jews are really a race. We will come to their aid. There is something in the talk of a Jewish race. But in this case, too, it is necessary to stand things on their head in order to examine the matter, which is extremely complex. That is to say, we must treat race not as an original factor, but as an artificial product, not as the beginning, but as the result of a process of evolution. To attempt to trace back the Jews of the present day to the original Jews of the Bible would be a hazardous and absurd undertaking. In the course of Jewish history, there was a constant mingling of races which it is not easy to disentangle. But from about A.D. 1000, at the end of the period of proselytism, that is, the entry of people of other faiths into the Jewish religious community, the religion and laws of the Jews themselves, and the social relations in which they lived maintained an inbreeding which in duration and degree has no parallel in European history. The anthropological characteristics of race originated during this period, which in the course of more than 800 years produced a new type of human being, namely the Jew. But what is to be gained, even by proving the existence of Jewish racial characteristics, is quite another matter. The special characteristics of the Jews against which the anti-Semites pretend they are fighting are not in any way the product of race, but of the social conditions in which they live. The fact that they are a caste whose conditions of existence are prescribed by the world around them. When these imposed conditions no longer exist, then the characteristics disappear immediately. That is to say, at least in the second generation which has not had to live in these conditions. But such theoretical discussions take us a long way from the actual practice of National Socialism. In this sphere everything is much simpler and more straightforward. There is not a single question in which National Socialism has acted in accordance with its own arguments. On the contrary, it has always post factum found venal persons to justify its own barbarities as acts of culture. And if in Germany today racial research sets itself up as science, the real purpose is only to provide a new cloak for the bestialities of the existing regime. Race officials. The Frankfurter Zeitung of May 5, 1933 reports, quote, Dortmund, May 4th, TU. The government commissioner of Dortmund has issued instructions for the immediate organization of a race department in Dortmund. The assistant commissioner for health, Dr. Braus, who is to take charge of the department, has made an important statement to the press on the question of racial hygiene. He indicated that medical material relating to the 80,000 schoolchildren in Dortmund, which provided partial material for statistics of race hygiene, was already available. Thus, the department would first deal with the young persons who would constitute the next generation. At the same time, the investigations laid down under the recently published regulations would be undertaken, that is, in connection with the candidates for official positions and the students in the higher schools and universities. Investigation of the whole population would be a task for future years. The early publication of laws for the separation of the race and its division into types was to be anticipated. The essential feature of this legislation would be the prohibition of any intermingling of races in Germany. The population would also have to be divided into families whose offspring would be welcome to the state, and those whose offspring would be regarded as a burden on the nation. The logical consequence would be the demand for the compulsory sterilization of criminals and other antisocial elements. The fact that all the medical associations of Prussia had recently declared in favor of the sterilization of criminals, in the interests of the nation as a whole, proved that this demand put forward by the National Socialists was already recognized as justified by wide circles of the nation. The fundamental aim of the organization of racial hygiene could only be reached after some generations, but a government which was conscious of its responsibility was obliged to think in terms of generations. End of quote. Dr. Achim Gerke, a pushing young man, got himself appointed ministerial advisor and expert for racial research at the Ministry of the Interior. Men and submen. All of this seems relatively harmless. It is primarily directed to bring about the economic destruction of the Jewish population, but not to threaten life and limb. The following leaflet is not so harmless. It was distributed in thousands in all restaurants, and in particular was given to every German girl who was seen in company with a Jew. This document threatens every girl who is suspected of the terrible crime of being friendly with a Jew, that her face will be branded with the initials J.H., Judenhor, Jewish prostitute. The assurance is given that this is no mere empty threat, but that in any circumstances it will be carried out if the girl is seen again in company with a Jew. In this we have a clearer example of the National Socialist distinction between men and submen, submen being everyone who does not think and feel as the National Socialists do. The National Socialists divide the men and the submen into different groups. In Group 1 are the pure representatives of the Nordic race. In Group 2, according to Ziel und Weg, the Journal of the National Socialist Doctors, are, along with, quote, inebriates, drug takers, habitual criminals, and prostitutes, all persons of foreign race, particularly Jews." End of quote. The National Socialist race theoretician, Professor Stammler, proposed on behalf of the National Socialist doctors the following law for the division of the race. Quote, 1. Every person who is of foreign racial blood to the extent of 1/2, that is, one of whose parents or two of whose grandparents were of foreign race, irrespective of their religion, is regarded as of foreign race. Foreign race means all colored races, near Asiatic and Oriental races, including the Jew. 2. In conformity with this, every adult German citizen must declare on oath at the registration office for his area to what race he belongs. In the case of persons under age, the declaration must be made by their legal representatives. False declarations will be punished with imprisonment and confiscation of property. 3. Persons ascertained to be of foreign race must in future describe themselves not as Germans, but as of foreign race, Jews from Germany, etc. 4. Persons born after the Day of Grace are to rank as Germans only when both parents are German. Younger brothers or sisters, however, rank as of the same nationality as their elder brothers or sisters whose nationality has been established by declaration. End of quote. Breeding farms. Professor Stammler, whose name has already been mentioned, writes that, quote, "The aim of breeding is a physically, morally, and mentally sound person of Nordic race." End of quote. To help towards the achievement of this aim, breeding farms are to be provided. The outpourings of a certain Professor Ernst Bergmann indicate what kind of breeding farms they have in mind. Quote, "There are quite enough willing and industrious men and youths to provide mates for the available women and girls, and fortunately, one lively lad suffices for 10 to 20 girls who have not yet killed their desire for a child, were it not for the civilized nonsense, so contrary to nature, of monogamous and permanent marriage." End of quote. Professor Ernst Bergmann in Erkenntnisgeist und Muttergeist. We conclude these examples with yet another Bill for the Preservation of Race Purity, which contains the following. Quote, 1. Marriages between Germans and persons of foreign races are prohibited. Those which have already been contracted remain valid, but new marriages must not be entered into and will not be recognized. 2. Extramatrimonial sexual intercourse between Germans and persons of foreign race will be punished with penal servitude for the person of foreign race and imprisonment for the German party. Prostitutes do not come under this law. 3. The entry into Germany of persons of foreign race is only allowed in special circumstances. The settlement in Germany of persons of foreign race is prohibited. 4. Changes of name, which in most cases are for the sole purpose of concealing the race of the person concerned, are prohibited until further notice. Changes of name made since 1914 are cancelled. End of quote. It may be objected that this kind of nonsense has no real connection with the mass movement, that these race hygienists are only on the edge of the movement, which cannot be regarded as responsible for them. This suggestion is not well founded. A man like Professor Stammler is the official advisor on these questions. The bills drafted by him were introduced by the National Socialist fraction in the Reichstag. They are therefore typical and must be taken seriously as agitation material. Liquidation of the Jewish question. We have given a small number of examples out of the massive incidents in the war of extermination which is being waged against 600,000 German Jews. These documents and facts are typical of the artificially nurtured hatred of the Jews, who have once more in Europe's history been given the role of scapegoats. We have tried to show that in general this fanaticism is not directed against those who were first made the object of hatred, the big bankers, merchants, and speculators. The wrath of the people has once more been turned aside against the lesser fry, against the Jewish middle class and the Jewish working class. Forced denials. What action did the Jews in Germany take? They protested against the foreign atrocity propaganda. Under the pressure of the stormtroopers, they sent out into the world documents which were the product of mortal fear. Often their fear has made them go further than is necessary. No one can blame them. Not every man is a born hero. And eventually an enterprising man got the idea of publishing these denials which had been forced from the Jews in book form under the title The Atrocity Propaganda. The government-controlled Berliner Tageblatt devotes 2 columns to this extremely welcome book, but no one in the world will let himself be led to believe that it was not written by men in fear of their lives and their liberty, and that they were not compelled against their better knowledge to spread the lie that there is no persecution of Jews in Germany. Jews who support Hitler. There are even Jews who support Hitler. In the Jewish press, Wien, Bratislava of March 31st, the organ of the Orthodox Jews, a rabbi, Professor Dr. Weinberg, writes as follows, quote, "In Jewish circles generally, and particularly in Orthodox circles, there is more sympathy and understanding for the national revival in Germany than the leaders of this movement realize. The religious Jews know how particularly grateful they must be to Hitler for his energetic and thoroughgoing fight against communism." End of quote. The central organ of German Zionists, the Jüdische Rundschau, adopts the same attitude. Quote, "Jewish history will understand even Hitler. It will cite him as evidence of the fact that history is made up of the imponderables of human endeavor towards an ideal, no matter what this may be." End of quote. We have already quoted the statement made by the third partner in the alliance with Jewish orthodoxy and Jewish nationalism, Jewish capitalism, the statement made by Oskar Wassermann, director of the Deutsche Bank und Diskontogesellschaft, that he has not suffered the least inconvenience and that he has hardly been able to notice the change in things. Lenin on anti-Semitism. We have not hushed up these statements. On the contrary, they seem to us convincing proof that in the last analysis, the Jewish question, too, is not a question of race, but a class question. The similar experience in Russia under the Tsardom is summarized by Lenin as follows. Quote, "The propagation of hostility against the Jews is described as anti-Semitism. When the accursed Tsarist monarchy was at its last gasp, it tried to incite the ignorant workers and peasants against the Jews. The Tsar's police, in league with the landlords and the capitalists, organized pogroms. They tried to deflect the hatred of the workers and peasants, crushed down by want, from the landlords and exploiters and turn it against the Jews. It has often been the same in other countries too. The capitalists have roused up hostility against the Jews in order to throw dust in the eyes of the workers and distract them from the real enemy of the toiling peoples, capital. It is not the Jews who are the enemy of the toiling people. The enemies of the workers are the capitalists of every country. There are workers, toilers among the Jews. These form the majority. They are our brothers, our comrades in the fight for socialism, because they are oppressed by capital. There are kulaks, exploiters, capitalists among the Jews, as among all other peoples. The capitalists strive to arouse hostility between the workers of different religious beliefs, of different nations and races. The rich Jews, like the rich Russians and the rich people of all countries, all in league with each other, trample on, oppress, and contaminate the workers. Shame and contempt upon the accursed Tsarism which tortured and persecuted the Jews. Shame and contempt upon those who sow hostility against the Jews and hatred against other nations." End of quote.